My family invited me home after 5 years of silence, not because they missed me, but because they smelled money. On Christmas Eve, I sat in the corner like a discarded ornament, watching them hand out gifts to everyone except me, just as they prepared to turn me into their personal bank. I placed a single envelope on the table. They thought I returned for affection, but I had come back to settle the ledger. My name is Savannah Wright, and for the last 7 years, I have existed in the spaces between binary code and high-voltage power lines. To the world outside my office in Seattle, I am a ghost. To the energy sector, I am the person you call when the grid is about to collapse under the weight of its own inefficiency. My life is defined by optimization, by the ruthless elimination of redundancy, and by the accumulation of silent power. I do not post on social media. I do not attend galas. I simply ensure that when half the country flips a switch, the lights turn on. It is a lucrative invisibility. My bank accounts are full. My schedule is airtight, and my patience for inefficiency is non-existent. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when the past tried to claw its way back into my present. I was standing in front of a wall of monitors, watching a predictive algorithm reroute power loads for a mid-sized city in the Midwest, when my personal phone buzzed against the glass of my mahogany desk. The number was familiar, a ghost from a life I had surgically removed. It was my Aunt Linda. She was the family diplomat, the one who coated every toxic remark in a layer of honey so thick you did not realize you had been poisoned until you were already swallowing. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I did not say hello. I just listened. Her voice was breathless, pitched a little too high, feigning a delight that made my stomach turn. She told me it had been too long. She told me that Christmas was coming up and the house felt empty without the whole family. She told me that my parents missed me. Then came the hook. The only part of the conversation that was actually true. She said that Mom and Dad wanted to heal things, that there was an important family matter they needed to discuss, and that it would mean the world to everyone if I came home. I muted the phone and looked out at the city lights below me. Healing. That was a funny word for it. In the Wright Family Dictionary, healing was a synonym for refinancing. I knew exactly what was happening. I had run a soft credit check on my parents 3 days ago, a habit I had developed to keep tabs on potential collateral damage. Their mortgage was underwater, and my sister's latest business venture had just dissolved into a puddle of lawsuits and bad debt. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a liquidity event. Growing up, I was the variable in the equation that never quite fit. My sister, Tiffany, was the constant. She was the sun, burning bright and loud, demanding gravity from everyone around her. I was the difficult one because I was quiet. I was the ungrateful one because I preferred building circuit boards in the garage to parading around in matching holiday sweaters. They called me cold. They called me distinct. They said I lacked the warmth that made a house a home. What they really meant was that I lacked the pliability to be molded into a prop for their perfect family portraits. I unmuted the phone. I told Aunt Linda I would be there. I did not promise warmth. I did not promise forgiveness. I simply promised presence. I spent the next 48 hours preparing, not like a daughter going home for the holidays, but like a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover. I went to a boutique in downtown Seattle that did not have a sign out front. I bought gifts that were weapons of class warfare. For my mother, a cashmere shawl that cost $1,200 but looked, to the untrained eye, like simple gray wool. For my father, a vintage fountain pen that required a level of maintenance he would never provide. For Tiffany, a delicate silver bracelet that was tasteful, understated, and completely invisible next to the gaudy costume jewelry she adored. I packed my suitcase with precision, no logos, no flash. My clothes were tailored, dark, and expensive in a way that whispered rather than screamed. I wanted them to look at me and see nothing but a modest, boring woman who probably worked in IT support and lived in a studio apartment. I wanted them to underestimate me. It was the only advantage I needed. The drive to the old house took 4 hours. The roads wound through pine forests that used to make me feel small, but now they just looked like timber assets. I turned off the radio and drove in silence. I needed to calibrate my mind. I established a set of rules for myself, repeating them as the miles ticked by. Rule number 1 was to never engage in an argument that did not have a profit margin. Rule number 2 was to offer zero information about my personal life. Rule number 3 was to observe everything. I remembered the last Christmas I spent there. I was 22, fresh out of college, drowning in student loans that my parents refused to help with because they had just bought Tiffany a new convertible. They had sat around the table, laughing at my degree, telling me I should have studied something practical, something with a future. They had gifted me a set of kitchen towels. I remembered the shame burning in my chest, hot and suffocating, but I was not 22 anymore. Halfway there, a memory surfaced. Clear as ice, it was something a professor had told me during my junior year. Right after I had failed to get an internship I was desperate for because I was too awkward in the interview. He had looked at me, tapping his pen on my desk, and said that I should stop trying to be seen. He told me to build something they could not ignore. I had taken that advice to heart. I built Northlight Gridworks. I built a proprietary system that managed energy distribution for 3 states. I built a portfolio of assets that could buy my parents' entire neighborhood without liquidating a single stock. I had built a fortress, and now I was driving that fortress right back to the gates of the people who thought I was still living in a tent. I pulled into the long driveway just as the winter sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling slightly on the porch railing, a detail I filed away immediately. There were 3 cars in the driveway, including Tiffany's leased SUV. I parked my rental sedan at the very end of the row, blocking no one, taking up as little space as possible. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was a mask of polite indifference. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up my clutch. It was black leather, unbranded. Inside, tucked safely behind my phone and a tube of lipstick, was a thin, cream-colored envelope. It was not a Christmas card. It was not a check. It was a document I had finalized with my legal team 7 hours ago. It was the only gift I actually cared about giving. They wanted to talk about the future of the family estate. They wanted to discuss important matters. Well, I was ready to discuss them. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots, and walked toward the front door with the envelope burning a hole in my bag. I was returning as a stranger, but by the time I left, they would know exactly who I was. Standing on the front porch, with the cold December wind biting at my exposed cheeks, I felt the familiar weight of the house pressing down on me before I even touched the doorknob. It was a physical sensation, a heaviness in the chest that I had associated with this address for as long as I could remember. They say you cannot choose your family, but my parents had certainly chosen their child. They just had not chosen me. I closed my eyes for a brief second, allowing the ghosts of the past to drift through the closed door. It was not one single catastrophic event that had severed us. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a slow accumulation of indifference that eventually bled me dry. I remembered the year I turned 16. My birthday fell 2 weeks before Tiffany's, a scheduling error by the universe that ensured my existence was always a prelude to the main event. That year, my parents threw a garden party. They invited their friends, their business partners, and the neighbors they wanted to impress. It was ostensibly for me, but the banner hanging above the patio table was made of recycled vinyl from a 4th of July barbecue, and the cake was chocolate, which was my father's favorite, not mine. I hated chocolate. When it came time for gifts, my mother had handed me a small, heavy box wrapped in department store paper. Inside was a sewing kit. She had smiled that tight, public smile of hers, and told the guests that she hoped it would help me be more domestic, to fix the holes in my jeans instead of looking like a vagrant. 2 weeks later, for Tiffany's birthday, they bought her a car. It was a used sedan, but it was polished to a shine and wrapped in a giant red bow. The difference was not in the monetary value, though the gap between $20 and $5,000 was significant. The difference was in the attention. They had listened to Tiffany complain about walking to school. They had heard her. When I spoke, my words seemed to dissolve into the air before they reached their ears. They had labels for us, sticky and impossible to peel off. Tiffany was the star, the socialite, the fragile flower that needed watering. I was the weed growing through the cracks in the pavement. They called me sullen because I read books during dinner parties. They called me weird because I preferred taking apart the toaster to see how the heating elements worked, rather than discussing the neighbor's divorce. They called me impractical. That was their favorite word for me. Impractical. To survive. I found air pockets outside the house. My sanctuary was the high school computer lab, a windowless room that smelled of ozone and floor wax. There, the rules made sense. If you wrote the code correctly, the program ran. If you soldered the circuit perfectly, the light turned on. There was no politics, no favoritism, and no need to smile to get a result. I joined the robotics club, not because I wanted friends, but because I wanted access to the equipment. I spent hours there, long after the janitors had started mopping the halls. I remembered winning the state science fair in my junior year. I had built a rudimentary solar tracking system that increased panel efficiency by 15%. It was a massive achievement. I came home with the oversized blue ribbon and a certificate that promised a $500 grant. I walked into the kitchen, bursting with a rare, fragile pride, ready to show them that their impractical daughter had done something real. My mother was at the kitchen island, consoling Tiffany because she had not been selected for the varsity cheerleading squad. My father was on the phone. Pacing, I laid the ribbon on the counter. My mother glanced at it, patted my hand without looking at me, and asked if I could go to the store to buy ice cream because Tiffany needed cheering up. That was the moment the ribbon became trash to me. I threw it in the garbage can in the garage on my way to get the ice cream. I never told them about the grant money. I put it in a savings account that they did not know existed. That account became my escape plan. I hunted scholarships with the predatory focus of a starving animal. I wrote essays until my fingers cramped. I maintained a 4.0 grade average not for the glory, but because it was currency. I needed to buy my freedom. When I received a full scholarship to a top engineering university 3 states away, the reaction at the dinner table was underwhelming. My father asked if engineering was a job for a woman. My mother asked who would help her set up the Christmas lights if I was gone. The most painful memory, the one that still stung if I let myself touch it, happened right before I left. It was the only time I saw genuine pride in their eyes directed at me. But it was a reflection. Tiffany had started a blog. She wanted to be a lifestyle influencer. Years before that was a viable career path for the masses. She was hopeless with the technical side. She could not format the photos. The layout was a mess, and the site kept crashing. She was in tears, throwing a tantrum that shook the walls. My parents begged me to help her. Use your computer thing. They said, fix it for your sister. So I did. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, rewriting the HTML, optimizing the image loads, and building her a custom layout that looked professional and sleek. When I showed them the finished product, my father clapped me on the shoulder. He told me I was a good sister. He told me that now. Tiffany could really shine. They were proud of me, but only because I had made myself a utility for their golden child. I was not the artist. I was the easel holding the canvas. When I packed my car to leave for college, they treated it like a phase. They told the neighbors I was going through a rebellious period and that I would be back once I realized how hard the real world was. They expected me to fail. They expected me to come crawling back, asking for a loan, asking for my old room, asking to be reabsorbed into the family organism. I never did. I stopped calling first. I realized that if I did not pick up the phone, silence would stretch for months. The only time my phone rang was when they needed something technical fixed, or when they needed to complain about a relative, or when they wanted to know if I could lend Tiffany a little cash because she was between paychecks. I was not a daughter. I was a tech support line with a wallet. So I cut the cord. I changed my number and only gave the new one to Aunt Linda. The only person who had ever smuggled me an extra slice of cake or asked me how school was going without looking at her watch. I miss them, sometimes, in a visceral, biological way. I miss the idea of them. I miss the family that existed in commercials and holiday movies, but I did not miss the feeling of being invisible in a room full of people. Now, standing on the other side of that door, I was no longer the girl who fixed websites for approval. I was no longer the teenager who hid in the computer lab. I had built a life out of the very things they mocked. I had turned my impractical obsession into an empire. I touched the envelope in my bag again, feeling the sharp corner of the paper through the leather. I was not here to scream. I was not here to cry or to list every grievance from 1995 to the present. That would be inefficient. That would give them power. I was here to show them the result of their neglect. They wanted to see what became of the sullen, weird daughter Fine. I would show them. But this time, I was not asking for a seat at the table. I was buying the building. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and wood smoke, and pushed the door open. The world knows Northlight Gridworks as a boring infrastructure company, the kind of entity you scroll past in the business section, because the headlines are filled with words like substation, load balancing, and grid latency. That is by design. We are the plumbing of the modern world. When a heatwave hits Texas, or a blizzard buries New York. My code is the invisible hand that decides where the electricity goes. I am the Director of Systems Architecture, a title that sounds dry enough to put my mother to sleep within 30 seconds, which is exactly why I use it. In reality, my job is high-stakes crisis management. I manage a team of 50 engineers who integrate predictive artificial intelligence into aging power grids. We prevent blackouts before they happen. We stop cyber attacks from foreign entities trying to shut down hospitals. It is high pressure, high intensity, and incredibly lucrative. My base salary is in the mid-six figures, but the stock options I vested last year put me in a tax bracket my father cannot even conceptualize. I own a penthouse in Seattle with a view of the Sound. I have a diversified investment portfolio managed by a fiduciary who is terrified of me. I drive a car that costs more than my parents' entire mortgage principal. But none of that exists here. To the people inside this house, I am still Savannah the struggler, the one who works in computers, a phrase they say with the same dismissive tone one might use for someone who collects stamps. I have cultivated this ignorance carefully. In the right family, information is ammunition. If they knew I had money, the dynamic would shift instantly. I would no longer be the disappointment. I would be the prey. I have seen how they treat successful cousins or wealthy neighbors. The fawning, the subtle hints about bad luck, the sudden emergencies that only a check can fix. I refuse to become their resource. I refuse to let them cannibalize the success I built on the ruins of their neglect. So, I have a secret life. It is populated not by blood relatives, but by a chosen family of sharks and saints who actually know me. There is Marcus, my mentor and the CEO of Northlight, who taught me that saying no is a complete sentence. There is Elena, my college roommate turned venture capitalist, who was the first person to tell me I was brilliant without adding a qualifier. There is my team, a group of misfits and geniuses who would walk through fire if I asked them to. They are my people. They know about the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the victories that felt like conquering the world. They sent me texts before I got on the plane. "Do not let them get in your head," Elena had written. "Remember who signs the checks." I held on to that thought as I stood in the foyer. This trip was not a homecoming. It was an audit. I was giving them one last chance to prove my hypothesis wrong. I wanted to see if there was any spark of genuine connection left, any desire to know Savannah the human being rather than Savannah the utility. But I was not naive. I had prepared for this interaction the same way I prepared for a board meeting. On the flight over, I had opened my tablet and written down a list of non-negotiables. It was a firewall for my sanity. Rule 1. No financial disclosures. If they asked about my rent, I would say it was high but manageable. If they asked about my savings, I would say I was putting a little away for a rainy day. Rule 2. No emotional bait. When my mother sighed about how hard her life was, or when Tiffany made a backhanded compliment about my outfit, I would not react. Reaction suggests I care. Reaction suggests their opinion still holds weight. Rule 3. The escape hatch. I had a rental car with a full tank of gas and an open-ended return ticket. If the conversation shifted to guilt-tripping or monetary demands, I was gone. I would not sleep in my old childhood bed if the price of admission was my dignity. I would drive to the nearest luxury hotel, order room service, and fly back to Seattle the next morning. I stepped fully into the hallway. The smell hit me first, cinnamon candles masking the scent of old dust and damp wood. It was the smell of stagnation. The wallpaper was the same floral pattern from 15 years ago, just slightly more yellowed at the edges. It felt like walking into a museum dedicated to a version of myself that had died a long time ago. My father appeared from the living room. He looked older, his hair thinner, his posture slumped with the weight of someone who spent too much time worrying about appearances and not enough time fixing the foundation. He held a drink in his hand, the ice clinking against the glass. "Savannah," he said, "you made it." There was no hug. He did not cross the room to greet me. He just stood there, inspecting me. I saw his eyes scan my outfit. I was wearing a black turtleneck and dark trousers. To him, I looked plain. He did not know the turtleneck was cashmere silk blend from a designer in Milan, or that the boots on my feet were custom-made leather. He saw what he expected to see: his plain, unexciting daughter, who probably lived paycheck to paycheck. "Traffic was fine," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Good, he muttered, turning back toward the living room. "Your sister is in the kitchen. She has big news. Prepare yourself. She is very excited." The way he said it, big news, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. In this house, big news usually meant big expenses. It meant a wedding, a baby, a business launch, or a lawsuit, and usually, it meant someone else was expected to pay for it. I followed him, my boots making no sound on the hardwood. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was not a participant in this drama anymore. I was an anthropologist observing a primitive culture. I checked my pulse mentally. It was steady. My breathing was even. I was not afraid of them anymore. I was not desperate for their approval. I was just curious. I wanted to see how long it would take for them to reveal their hand. I wanted to see exactly how much they thought I was worth, and how little they thought of me. I walked toward the kitchen, where the sound of my mother's laughter and Tiffany's high-pitched chatter drifted out like a warning siren. I adjusted the strap of my bag, feeling the reassuring stiffness of the envelope inside. I was ready. I was Northlight Gridworks. I was the person who kept the lights on, and I was about to see if my family deserved to be left in the dark. The kitchen was exactly as I remembered it, yet somehow significantly smaller. It was a phenomenon of physics I had never quite understood, how a space that felt like a cavern when I was 10 could feel like a coffin when I was 29. The linoleum floors were the same peeling beige, the cabinets the same heavy oak that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. But the real shrinkage came from the people filling the room. The air was thick with the humidity of boiling potatoes and the heavier, stickier atmosphere of silent judgment. My mother was at the stove, commanding a fleet of pots. Aunt Linda was chopping carrots at the island. Uncle Jerry was leaning against the refrigerator, nursing a beer. When I walked in, the conversation didn't stop, but it shifted frequency. It was that subtle drop in volume that happens when the subject of the gossip suddenly enters the room. "Savannah," my mother said without turning around, "grab an apron. We are behind schedule." That was the greeting. No hug. No "how was your drive?" Just an immediate conscription into labor. I placed my bag on the counter carefully, so the envelope wouldn't bend, and took off my coat. I could feel their eyes on me. It was a physical sensation, like a laser scan at a checkout counter. They were pricing me. I saw Aunt Linda's eyes dart to my sweater. It was plain black, devoid of logos. I saw her calculate the value: generic department store, maybe on sale. She looked at my boots, which were covered in a fine layer of road dust. She mentally deducted points for that. In their eyes, I was a snapshot of mediocrity. I was the cousin who moved away to work with computers and probably lived in a basement apartment with 3 roommates and a cat. Then the side door banged open, and Tiffany made her entrance. If I was a black and white sketch, Tiffany was a neon billboard. She swept into the room in a swirl of faux fur and perfume that smelled like vanilla and desperation. She was wearing a sequined dress that was entirely inappropriate for a casual family dinner, but perfect for the Instagram story she was undoubtedly filming. "Savannah," she shrieked, closing the distance between us. She hugged me. But it was one of those air hugs where her body didn't actually touch mine, preserving her makeup and my personal space simultaneously. She pulled back and looked me up and down, her smile fixed and brittle. "You look comfortable," she said. The word was an insult wrapped in velvet. "You know, I love that you just don't care about trends. It is so brave of you." I smiled, a tight, polite expression I used for junior developers who broke the build on a Friday afternoon. "It is good to see you, Tiffany." She spun around to address the room, her hands fluttering like manic birds. The energy shifted instantly. My mother turned from the stove, her face softening into a look of adoration that I had never been on the receiving end of. Uncle Jerry straightened up. Tiffany was the sun, and they were the heliotropes, turning their heads to follow her light. "Wait until you hear," Tiffany announced, breathless. "The beta launch is huge. We are talking global reach. It is not just a brand. Mom, it is a movement." My mother wiped her hands on her apron, beaming. "Tell your sister. Honey, tell Savannah what you are building." Tiffany turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of manic optimism and calculation. "It is a lifestyle curation platform. We call it the Glow Up. Basically, I help women unlock their inner potential through curated shopping experiences and mindset coaching. It is going to be the next big unicorn startup." I nodded slowly. In my world, a unicorn was a company with a valuation of over $1 billion, backed by rigorous data and proprietary technology. In Tiffany's world, it apparently meant a website that sold drop-shipped jewelry and affirmations. "That sounds ambitious," I said neutrally. "Oh, it is," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you know, business is expensive. You have to spend money to make money. Right?" The phrase hung in the air, heavy and pregnant. I saw my father exchange a look with Uncle Jerry. I saw my mother bite her lip, a nervous habit she had when she was thinking about finances. The trap was being set, and I was standing right on the trigger plate. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the plates with the gold rim that were hand-washed and only used for people we wanted to impress. There were 12 seats. My parents sat at the heads. Tiffany was placed to my father's right, the position of honor. Aunt Linda and Uncle Jerry were next. I found my place card at the very end of the table, on the corner where the table leg interfered with your knees. It was the same spot I had sat in when I was 12. It was the overflow seat, the spot for the person who didn't really need to be part of the main conversation. As the bowls of mashed potatoes and green beans were passed around, the interrogation began. It wasn't direct. It never was. It was a series of probing strikes designed to find the weak points in my armor. "So, Savannah," Aunt Linda asked, ladling gravy onto her plate, "are you still at that same company, the one with the, what was it, servers?" "Yes," I said, unfolding my napkin. "Still there?" "And they treat you well," she pressed. "I know the tech industry is suffering right now. I saw on the news that everyone is getting laid off. Is your job safe?" She wasn't asking out of concern. She was fishing for a tragedy. She wanted to hear that I was struggling so she could feel better about her own son, who was 30 and still asking for gas money. "My job is stable." "Thank you," I said. My mother chimed in from the other end of the table. "But are you happy?" "Savannah, you always look so tired in your photos. Not that you send many, but you know, money isn't everything. It is better to have a job you love than to chase a paycheck and be miserable." The irony was so sharp it almost cut my tongue. Here they were, assuming I was chasing a paycheck, while simultaneously implying I didn't have a big enough one. "I am fine. Mom," I said, I have enough to pay my bills. A sigh went around the table. It was the collective sound of confirmation. She has enough to pay the bills. To them. That meant I was breaking even. It meant I had no surplus. It meant I was safe to ignore. Tiffany laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. You were always so serious. Savannah, that is your problem. You worry too much about the practical stuff. You need to manifest abundance. That is what I tell my clients. If you put the energy out there, the universe provides. You are right, Uncle Jerry said, pointing his fork at me. You have to take risks. Look at your sister. She is building an empire. You are just maintaining. I took a sip of water to hide the smirk that threatened to break through my composure. Maintaining. If only they knew what I maintained. If only they knew that the power allowing them to heat this house and cook this food was currently being balanced by an algorithm I wrote 3 years ago. I kept my answers short. Gray rocks, boring. Yes, I have a car. No, I don't own a house yet. I let them assume I couldn't afford a down payment. Rather than explaining I owned 3 properties in a holding company, yes, I live alone. No, I am not seeing anyone special. With every underwhelming answer, I saw their interest in me fade. I was becoming part of the furniture again. They stopped looking at me and started looking past me, directing their energy toward the glowing star at the other end of the table. But as the conversation drifted away from me, I sharpened my hearing. I became a listening device. I picked up the fragments of sentences they thought were too quiet for me to hear over the clinking of silverware. My father leaned in toward Tiffany. We need to look at the numbers again, he murmured. The initial tranche is ready. I know. Daddy, Tiffany whispered back, her hand resting on his arm. But the investors need to see a solid commitment. The seed money has to be substantial. We are handling it, my mother added softly. We are pulling from the equity. We just need everyone to be on board. The words floated down the table and landed in my lap like grenades. Seed money, equity, family investment. I looked down at my plate, pushing a pea around with my fork. They weren't just asking for a loan. They were liquidating the family's stability to fund a fantasy. And suddenly, the invitation made perfect sense. They didn't need me to contribute money they thought I didn't have any. They needed me to sign off on something. There was an asset they couldn't touch without me, or a liability they wanted to share. I wasn't a guest. I was a co-signer. I looked up, catching Tiffany's eye. She winked at me, a gesture of faux camaraderie. I am just so glad you are here. Savannah, she said loud enough for the table to hear. It is really important that the whole family supports each other right now. I smiled back. Cold and sharp. I couldn't agree more. Tiffany, the trap was set, the bait was laid, but they had made a critical error in their calculations. They thought they were hunting a mouse. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with a tiger. The roast beef was dry. It sat on my plate like a piece of shriveled leather, drowned in gravy that had started to congeal the moment it hit the cold porcelain. But no one else seemed to notice the culinary failure. They were too busy feasting on the main course, Tiffany's ego. My father stood up, tapping his spoon against his wineglass. The sharp, insistent chinking silenced the room. He held his glass aloft, his face flushed with a mixture of red wine and paternal performance art. To family, he announced, his voice booming with a theatrical warmth that stopped exactly at the edge of his eyes, and specifically, to the future. We are so proud of Tiffany. It takes courage to dream big. It takes a special kind of spirit to look at the world and say, I can make this better. Here, here. Uncle Jerry grunted, raising his beer bottle. Tiffany beamed, dipping her head in a gesture of false modesty that she must have practiced in the mirror. She reached out and squeezed my mother's hand. Thank you, Daddy. But I could not do it without the support system. That is what this brand is about. Community, tribe. The toast ended, and the wine was consumed. But I knew the preamble was over. Now came the ask. It was a classic bait and switch. First, you sell the emotion, then you sell the invoice. My mother set her glass down with a deliberate clatter. "Speaking of support," she said, pivoting her body toward the center of the table. "We have been looking at the projections for the glow up. The potential is astronomical, but as with any great enterprise, the initial phase is capital intensive. Here we go." I took a slow sip of water, letting the cool liquid wash away the taste of the dry beef. Tiffany cleared her throat. She didn't have a business plan. She didn't have a pitch deck. She had a vibe. "It is about capturing the zeitgeist," she said, using her hands to sculpt invisible shapes in the air. "People are tired of buying products. They want to buy a better version of themselves. My platform connects the retail experience with spiritual wellness. We are talking about high-margin goods crystals, ethically sourced athleisure, curated supplements all under a subscription model. It is holistic retail." She looked around the table. Aunt Linda was nodding vigorously. Despite the fact that the last time she bought anything online, she accidentally ordered $300 worth of cat food for a dog. Uncle Jerry looked solemn, as if Tiffany had just explained the theory of relativity. They didn't understand a word she was saying. They just heard high margin and subscription and assumed it meant free money. "So," Uncle Jerry said, "chewing on a roll? You just need to get the inventory rolling." "Exactly," Tiffany said. "We need to secure the warehouse space and the initial stock. The banks are so slow. You know, they don't understand modern agility. They want 3 years of tax returns. By the time they approve a loan, the trend will be over. We need agile capital." Agile capital. I almost laughed out loud. That was a fancy way of saying money from people who won't sue me when I lose it. The table fell silent for a beat. The air grew heavy. I could feel the crosshairs shifting. They moved from Tiffany, the golden sun, to the dark corners of the room where the resources might be hiding. My father turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto me. It wasn't a look of affection. It was the look a miner gives a vein of ore. "Savannah," he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound casual. "We were talking the other day. You have been out in Seattle for a while now. That industry, the tech thing, it is doing well, isn't it?" I carefully cut a piece of potato. "It has its ups and downs." I said, "Come on." Uncle Jerry chuckled, leaning over the table. "We read the papers. Those computer companies throw money around like confetti. Stock options, bonuses. You're probably sitting on a nice little pile out there. Right?" The directness was crude, even for him. In the Wright family, we usually danced around the money talk for at least another hour. They must be desperate. "I live in an expensive city." "Uncle Jerry," I said, keeping my voice flat, "the cost of living is high. By the time you pay rent, taxes, and insurance, it balances out. I get by. It was the understatement of the century. Last month, my quarterly bonus alone could have paid off Uncle Jerry's truck and renovated his kitchen. But they didn't need to know that. Aunt Linda sniffed, looking unimpressed. "Well, sure, but it is not like you have expenses, dear. No husband, no children. What do you spend it on?" I looked at her. "I spent it on freedom. I spent it on ensuring I never had to ask anyone at this table for a dime. I save what I can." I said, "My mother made a tisking sound, always so cautious. You know, Savannah, sometimes you have to circulate money to make it grow. Hoarding it doesn't help anyone." Then came the insult I had been waiting for. It was delivered by a second cousin whose name I could barely remember, a man who sold used jet skis and considered himself a mogul. "You know," he said, pointing his fork at me. "My buddy runs a tech support shop in Dayton, fixes printers, sets up Wi-Fi, that sort of thing. He says the market is saturated, says they can hire kids out of high school to do that coding stuff now for $15 an hour. It is basically blue-collar work with air conditioning. Right?" The table erupted in laughter. It was a relief for them. They needed to bring me down. If I was just a glorified repairman, then my refusal to fund Tiffany wasn't because I was smart with money. It was because I was a failure. It made Tiffany's request seem noble, and my reluctance seem petty. I watched them. I watched my father chuckle and shake his head. I watched my mother smile into her napkin. But mostly, I watched Tiffany. She wasn't just laughing. She was gloating. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "It is okay." "Savannah," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We know you work hard. Not everyone is cut out for the executive lifestyle. Some people are just worker bees, and that is fine. The world needs worker bees." I didn't blink. I didn't defend my title. I didn't mention that the worker bee she was mocking had just overseen a grid integration project that would power 3 million homes. I let the insult land. I let them believe it. But Tiffany wasn't done. She needed to close the deal. However, she continued, her tone sharpening. "Even if you are just getting by, I think it is important we all pitch in. Mom and Dad spent a fortune raising us. The lessons, the clothes, the college tuition. I mean, they supported you for years when you were finding yourself." I stiffened. They had paid for 2 semesters of state college before cutting me off. I had paid the rest with scholarships and 3 part-time jobs. "I think," Tiffany said, looking me dead in the eye, "that it is time to give back. If you have any savings, Savannah, you should invest them in the family. It is the least you can do after everything they sacrificed for you." The room went silent. This was the demand. It wasn't a request for investment. It was a demand for reparations. She was framing my existence as a debt I had to repay. My mother reached out and patted my hand. "It doesn't have to be a huge amount. Honey, just whatever you have tucked away. We can pool it with the equity loan we are taking on the house. It will be a family triumph." The equity loan. The words echoed in my head. They were going to mortgage the house, the only asset they actually owned, to fund a website that sold magic rocks. And they wanted my savings to plug the hole when the ship inevitably sank. I looked away from their hungry faces. I looked past Tiffany's sequins, past my father's red face, and focused on the Christmas tree in the corner. It was overloaded with lights and tinsel, burying the dying pine needles underneath. Piles of gifts sat under the branches, wrapped in shiny foil paper, boxes of perfume, ugly ties, plastic gadgets that would be in a landfill by February. They were waiting for my answer. They were waiting for me to open my wallet and apologize for not being enough. I looked at the tree, and then I looked at my bag, sitting on the floor by my feet. Inside was the envelope. I realized then that my gift wasn't going to be found under the tree. It wasn't wrapped in foil, and it certainly wasn't going to bring them joy, but it was the only thing I was going to give them. I turned back to the table, meeting Tiffany's gaze with a calmness that made her smile falter. "I understand the position," I said softly. My father exhaled, thinking he had won. "Good girl. We knew you would understand." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just let them sit in their victory for a few more minutes. Let them enjoy the appetizer, because the main course I was about to serve was going to be impossible to swallow. The living room on Christmas morning was a study in controlled chaos. Wrapping paper, ripped and crumpled, formed a sea of metallic red and green around the base of the tree. The air smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. A nostalgic scent that usually triggers warmth, but today only triggered a heightened state of alertness. I sat on the periphery, in a wingback chair that had seen better days. Holding a mug of black coffee that I had brewed myself because the pot my mother made was mostly creamer, the ritual was in full swing. My father was playing Santa, handing out gifts with a boisterous energy that increased in direct proportion to the value of the item in his hands. For Tiffany, he announced, handing her a box the size of a toaster oven. Tiffany squealed, tearing into the paper. It was a designer handbag, the kind with logos printed all over it so no one could possibly mistake it for something affordable. She held it up, posing for an invisible camera. "Oh my God, Daddy, it is perfect. It matches the brand aesthetic perfectly." Next came a set of golf clubs for Uncle Jerry, then a spa weekend voucher for Aunt Linda. My mother received a diamond pendant that I knew my father had put on a credit card he was already struggling to pay off. The room was a cacophony of thank yous, and I love it's and the sound of paper tearing. I watched the pile under the tree shrink. I tracked the boxes. There was the large silver one for Tiffany, the long rectangular one for Uncle Jerry, the small velvet one for Mom. Slowly, the frantic energy began to ebb. The pile was gone. The floor was covered in debris. Everyone was holding something, admiring their new possessions, comparing loot. I sat there, my hands wrapped around my warm mug, waiting. My father looked around the room, clapping his hands together. Well, that looks like the lot of them. Everyone happy. Silence stretched for a second. Then, Aunt Linda, bless her clueless heart, looked over at me. Wait, she said, frowning. Did we miss one Savannah didn't open anything? The room froze. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated awkwardness. My mother's eyes widened, and she brought a hand to her mouth in a gesture that looked rehearsed. Oh, she gasped. Oh, goodness. Savannah. She looked at my father. My father looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at her new handbag. The thing is, my mother started, her voice pitching up into that frantic diplomatic tone. We weren't sure if you were coming until the very last minute. Honey, and with the shipping delays this year, everything is just a mess. Right. My father jumped in, seizing the lifeline. We ordered you something, but it didn't arrive in time. The supply chain. You know, it is terrible right now. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I had tracked the shipping on the gifts I sent them, and they had arrived 3 days ago. If they could order golf clubs, they could have ordered a book. They hadn't forgotten. They had simply deprioritized me to the point of non-existence. Tiffany laughed. Breaking the tension, oh, come on. Savannah is an adult. She doesn't care about presents. Right. Sav, do not be so sensitive. You used to cry about this stuff when you were 10. It is not cute anymore. There it was. The old label. Sensitive. The weapon they used to dismiss any legitimate emotional reaction I ever had. If I was hurt, I was sensitive. If I was angry, I was dramatic. I looked at Tiffany. She was smirking, challenging me to make a scene. She wanted me to get upset. She wanted me to ask where my gift was so she could roll her eyes and call me materialistic. She wanted to be the victim of my bad attitude. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I took a sip of coffee. I placed the mug down on the coaster with a deliberate, soft clink. My face remained completely impassive. I didn't blink. I didn't frown. I just looked at them with the flat, unreadable gaze of a surveillance camera. The silence stretched. It became uncomfortable. My mother shifted in her seat. Uncle Jerry coughed. The lack of reaction was far more disturbing to them than a tantrum would have been. They didn't know what to do with a target that didn't bleed. That is fine, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of any emotion whatsoever. I understand. Logistics can be difficult. My father let out a relieved breath that sounded like a tire deflating. Exactly. Logistics. We will get it to you later. I stood up. The movement drew every eye in the room. I walked over to the side table where I had placed 3 small, impeccably wrapped boxes. The paper was thick, matte charcoal, tied with real silk ribbon. They stood out against the carnage of the cheap foil paper on the floor like artifacts from a more advanced civilization. I picked them up and walked to the center of the room. I didn't forget. Though, I said, I handed the first box to my mother. She took it, surprised by the weight. She unwrapped it carefully. When she opened the lid, she gasped. Inside was the cashmere shawl. She ran her fingers over the fabric. It was soft as a cloud, the kind of luxury she had only ever seen in magazines. Savannah, she breathed. This is real cashmere. I handed the next box to my father. He opened it to reveal the fountain pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black with gold trim. He stared at it. He knew enough about status symbols to know what he was holding. And for Tiffany, I said. Handing her the final box, she ripped it open, expecting, I assume, a gift card or something handmade. When she saw the bracelet solid platinum, thin, elegant, her jaw actually dropped. It wasn't the gaudy trash she usually wore. It was sophisticated. It was money. The atmosphere in the room pivoted so fast it almost gave me whiplash. Oh, honey, my mother said, standing up to hug me. This is too much. You shouldn't have. You are so thoughtful. My father was examining the pen, turning it over in his hands. This is a serious writing instrument. Savannah, I am impressed. You really have grown up, haven't you? Suddenly, I wasn't the sensitive child or the worker bee. I was the successful daughter. I was the provider of high-end goods. Their affection had a price tag, and I had just met the asking price. Tiffany slipped the bracelet on, admiring the way it caught the light. "It is gorgeous," she admitted. Though I could hear the jealousy grinding in her voice, "I guess that tech job pays better than we thought." My mother squeezed my arm, her eyes shining with a sudden, predatory hope. "We are so proud of you, Savannah. You have really made something of yourself." "We knew you would." I looked at them. I looked at the sudden warmth in their eyes, fueled entirely by the expensive objects in their hands. They didn't see me. They didn't ask how I chose the gifts. They didn't ask about the life that allowed me to afford them. They just saw the value. They saw the potential for more. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, absolute and final. This was the confirmation I needed. The audit was complete, the results were in, and the account was bankrupt. I stepped back, gently disengaging from my mother's touch. "I need a glass of water," I said. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water from the tap, and drank it standing by the sink. I took a deep breath. I adjusted my sweater. I felt the shape of the envelope in my back pocket. When I returned to the living room, I didn't sit in the corner chair. I pulled a straight-backed dining chair into the center of the circle. I sat down, crossing my legs, my posture perfect. I looked like I was about to lead a shareholder meeting. The room quieted down. They sensed a shift. The thank yous faded. They looked at me, waiting. My mother smiled nervously. "What is it?" "Dear," I placed my hands on my lap. I looked at each of them in turn. My father with his pen, my mother with her shawl, Tiffany with her bracelet. "I am glad you like the gifts," I said. "I wanted to give you something tangible, something to remember this visit by." "Well, it is very generous," my father said, puffing out his chest. "We really appreciate it." I nodded. But there was a little confusion earlier about my gift. Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, are we back to that?" "We said we were sorry." "Savannah." "No," I interrupted her. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a razor blade. "I am not talking about the gift you didn't get me. I am talking about the gift I got for myself." They stared at me. "You see," I continued, leaning forward slightly. "I realized that if I waited for this family to give me what I needed, I would be waiting forever. So this year, I decided to take matters into my own hands." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. It was cream-colored, sealed with wax. I placed it on the coffee table in front of me. "I have a gift for myself," I said, "and I think it is time I showed you what it is." I reached into the envelope and pulled out a single, heavy object. It was a key, but not just any key. It was an antique brass key, heavy and cool to the touch, attached to a leather fob embossed with a specific address in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood. Beside it, I laid down a folded document on the coffee table. It was the settlement statement from the closing, with the final purchase price highlighted in bold black ink. I let the object sit there for a moment, absorbing the silence of the room. The Christmas lights blinked rhythmically, casting red and green shadows across the paper. "What is this?" my father asked, squinting at the paper without touching it, as if it might bite him. "It is a closing statement," I said, keeping my voice level. "I closed on the property 3 days ago. It is a 1920 Craftsman on the South Slope, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, and a view of the Sound that is unobstructed by anything other than the occasional cloud." The room went deadly quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to cease. They looked at the key. They looked at the paper. They looked at me. Tiffany was the first to break the paralysis. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. You bought a house in Queen Anne, Savannah. Do you know what the property taxes alone are in that area? You cannot afford a studio apartment there, let alone a house." I didn't look at her. I looked at my father, read the line at the bottom. Dad, the one that says cash to close. My father picked up the paper. His hands were shaking slightly. whether from the alcohol or the tension. I couldn't tell. He adjusted his reading glasses. He scanned the document. His eyes stopped at the bottom of the page. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. $2 million, he stammered. $2,800,000. A gasp went around the room. It was the sound of oxygen leaving the lungs of everyone present. Uncle Jerry leaned forward, nearly knocking over his beer. 2.8. You mean a mortgage, right? You took out a jumbo loan, that is suicide. Girl, the interest rates will eat you alive. No, I said, leaning back in my chair. Look at the financing section. Uncle Jerry, it is blank. It was an all-cash offer. My mother made a sound like a whimpering dog. Cash. You had almost $3 million in cash, I corrected her gently. I had considerably more than that. That was just the portion I decided to liquidate for the house. I prefer not to keep too much capital tied up in real estate, but the market was right, and I needed a place to park some equity. The atmosphere in the room transformed instantly. The condescension evaporated, replaced by a raw, hungry curiosity. It was a visceral shift. I could smell the greed. It smelled like sweat and desperation. They were no longer looking at the poor relation. They were looking at a winning lottery ticket. But how, Tiffany asked, her voice small and tight. She looked at her platinum bracelet, then at the key on the table. The bracelet suddenly seemed very small. You work in IT. You fix servers. I turned to her. I do not fix servers. Tiffany, I design the architectural logic for autonomous energy distribution. I work for Northlight Gridworks. Yeah, we know, she snapped. The utility company. I smiled. It is not a utility company. It is a tech infrastructure firm, and I am not an employee. I am a founding engineer. When we went public last year, my initial equity stake vested. I used terms I knew would confuse them but sound expensive. Equity stake, vested, IPO. My father set the paper down with reverence. He looked at me with new eyes. He was recalibrating his entire worldview. The daughter he had dismissed was suddenly the most powerful person in the room. So, he said, his voice trembling with a suppressed excitement. You are wealthy. I am comfortable, I said, using the same word they had used to dismiss me an hour ago, but reclaiming it. Questions began to fire at me from all sides. It was an interrogation, but this time, the dynamic was different. They weren't trying to catch me in a lie. They were trying to calculate their share. How much stock do you have left? Uncle Jerry asked. Is the market stable? My mother asked. Should you sell now? What about liquid cash? Tiffany asked, her eyes narrowing. How much do you have access to right now? Today I raised a hand to stop them. It was a command, and for the first time in my life, they obeyed instantly. I did not tell you this to discuss my portfolio strategy. I said, I told you this because I was tired of the narrative. You have spent the last 5 years thinking I was struggling. You have spent this entire evening making jokes about my career. I wanted to correct the record. My mother's face crumbled into a look of theatrically wounded pride. She reached out across the table, trying to touch my hand, but I moved it just out of reach. Oh, Savannah, she said, her voice dripping with syrup. We were never making fun of you. We were worried, a mother worries. We just wanted to make sure you were okay. And look at you. You are a success. My father sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? We always knew she had a brain, the right genes. We pushed her hard because we knew she could take it. Tiffany nodded, jumping on the bandwagon. Exactly. I mean, who taught you to be so disciplined? We did. Growing up in this house made you tough. Savannah, you should be thanking us. If we had coddled you, you probably wouldn't have that drive. I watched them rewrite history in real time. It was fascinating and repulsive. 5 minutes ago, I was a failure because I was impractical. Now, I was a success because of their parenting. They were already taking credit for the empire I built in spite of them. And, my mother continued, her eyes darting to Tiffany and then back to me. This changes everything. It is a blessing, a real Christmas miracle. Because now, well, Now the family is safe. I saw the bridge they were building. They were connecting my bank account to their problems. Safe, I asked, keeping my expression neutral. Yes, my father said, leaning in. With resources like that, Savannah, we can really do things. The house needs repairs. Your mother's car is on its last legs. And Tiffany's business. He gestured to Tiffany, who was suddenly looking at me with a hopeful, hungry expression. $2.8 million for a house, Tiffany mused. That means you probably have access to what another 510 Savannah. Do you realize that with just 5% of that? The glow-up could launch globally. We could be partners, sisters and partners. It would be poetic. She smiled at me. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. You wouldn't even miss it, she added. It is like pocket change to you now. But for the family, it is everything. I looked at them. I looked at the hunger in their faces. They didn't see a daughter. They didn't see a sister. They saw a resource extraction site. They saw an oil well that had just been discovered in their backyard. They thought the reveal of my wealth was an invitation. They thought I was putting the money on the table to share. I picked up the key and the document. I slid them back into the envelope slowly, making sure they watched every movement. I think you are confused, I said. The room froze again. I didn't show you this to offer a solution to your problems. I said, I showed you this to show you that I don't have problems. My father's smile faltered. What do you mean, I said, standing up and smoothing down my sweater. That for years, you have assumed I was the one who needed help. You assumed I was the weak link. I just wanted you to see that while you were busy buying cars you couldn't afford and planning businesses that don't exist, I was building a reality. I looked directly at Tiffany. I am not an investor, Tiffany, and I am not an ATM. I am just the person you underestimated. My mother looked shocked. But we are family. You have so much. You can't just keep it all. I looked at her, and for the first time, I let a little bit of the coldness show in my eyes. I am not keeping it from you, Mom. I am just keeping it for the person who earned it. I turned to leave the room, knowing that I had just lit a fuse. The explosion wasn't going to be about the money. It was going to be about the entitlement. And I was ready for the fire. I am not telling you this to brag. I said over my shoulder, I am telling you this to end a misunderstanding. You thought I came back to ask for something. Now you know. I have everything I need. I walked toward the door, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their assumptions, the ghost of $2.8 million hanging in the air like a taunt. I did not even make it to the front door. Before my hand could touch the brass handle, my father's voice rang out, stripped of its holiday warmth and replaced with the steel of paternal authority. Savannah, wait. We need to talk, privately. He did not wait for my consent. He turned and walked toward the den, the small wood-paneled room where he used to smoke cigars and pretend to balance the family checkbook. My mother and Tiffany followed him instantly, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. It was not an invitation. It was a summons to a court-martial. I could have kept walking. I could have opened the door, gotten into my rental car, and driven back to civilization. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I wanted to see the anatomy of the trap. I wanted to see exactly how they planned to extract the wealth they had just discovered. So, I turned and followed them into the den. The room smelled of lemon polish and old ambition. My father sat behind his desk, assuming the position of power. My mother sat in the leather armchair to his right. Tiffany stood, leaning against the bookshelf, her arms crossed, her new platinum bracelet glinting under the track lighting. They had arranged themselves in a phalanx. I took the only remaining seat, a stiff wooden chair that faced the three of them. Close the door, my father said. I kicked it shut with my heel. All right, I am listening. Tiffany didn't waste time with pleasantries. The mask of the doting sister had dissolved. She looked at me with a terrifying clarity, her eyes hard and bright. We need $450,000, she said. She said the number casually, as if she were asking to borrow a sweater. $450,000. I raised an eyebrow. That is a very specific number. It is the seed round, Tiffany said, stepping forward. For the glow-up, to secure the inventory, the warehouse lease, and the initial marketing push. We have done the math. 450,000 gets us to launch. And in exchange, I asked. In exchange, my father interjected, you get to be part of the legacy. We are offering you a chance to get in on the ground floor. We are keeping it in the family. We could go to outside investors. Savannah, we have had offers, but we wanted to give you the first refusal. It was a clumsy lie. If they had offers, they would not be mortgaging the house. I see, I said. I crossed my legs and leaned back. So this is an investment opportunity? Exactly, my mother said, leaning forward, her face arranged in a plea. A family investment. Okay, I said. I treated the air in the room like the air in a boardroom cool, sterile, and transactional. If this is an investment, I need to see the due diligence materials. Send me the pitch deck, the 5-year financial projections, the market analysis, and the current cap table. I also need to see your vendor contracts and your personal credit reports if you are the primary guarantors. The silence that followed was absolute. They looked at me as if I had started speaking Mandarin. The what Tiffany asked, blinking. The business plan. Tiffany, I said, you are asking for $500,000. I assume you have a breakdown of how that capital will be deployed. You have a burn rate calculated. You have a customer acquisition strategy beyond posting on Instagram. My father slammed his hand on the desk. This isn't Wall Street, Savannah. This is your sister. I didn't flinch. You use the word investment, Dad. Investments require data. If you are asking for a gift, say it is a gift. But if you are asking for business capital, I am treating it like business. We don't have those papers, Tiffany snapped, her face flushing red. We are in the ideation phase. The vibe is there. The concept is solid. Why do you have to complicate everything with paperwork? You always do this. You try to use big words to make us feel stupid. I am not trying to make you feel stupid, I said calmly. I am trying to see if you have a plan to pay me back. My mother let out a sharp gasp. Pay you back, Savannah. We raised you. We put clothes on your back. We fed you for 18 years. We sacrificed everything so you could sit there with your fancy education and your millions, and now you are counting pennies with your own flesh and blood. Here it was. Layer 1 guilt. The transactional nature of their love was finally being invoiced. I am not counting pennies, I said. I am counting nearly $500,000. And regarding my upbringing, you provided the legal minimum required by the state. I paid for my own college. I paid for my own car. I have not asked you for $1 since I was 17. You are selfish, Tiffany spat out. Layer 2. Shame. You always were. You sit there in your designer clothes, hoarding your money, watching us struggle. It is disgusting. You have more than you could spend in a lifetime, and you won't help your sister achieve her dream. It is greedy. Savannah, it is ugly. I looked at her. I didn't feel shame. I felt a profound sense of boredom. It is not hoarding, I said. It is capital allocation. And right now, this asset class your company is high risk with zero projected return. Tiffany's face crumpled. The rage dissolved instantly into tears. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. She collapsed onto the arm of the sofa, burying her face in her hands. I just wanted to make you proud, she sobbed. I just wanted us to do this together. Why do you hate me, Savannah? Why do you want me to fail? My mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her. Look what you have done, she hissed at me. You broke her heart. All she wants is a signature. Savannah, just a check. Is that so hard for you? It is nothing to you, just a check. I stood up. The air in the room was suffocating. I am not writing a check, I said. Not for 400,000? Not for $4? My father stood up too. His face was a dark, bruised purple. He moved around the desk, coming into my personal space. He used his height to intimidate, a tactic that worked when I was 12. It did not work now. You listen to me, he growled. You are not walking out of here without helping this family. We know people. We talk to the aunts, the uncles. Do you want everyone to know what kind of daughter you are? Do you want us to tell Aunt Linda that you laughed in our faces? That you let your parents drown in debt while you bought mansions? Layer 3. Fear. The threat of social execution. We will tell them, Tiffany said, looking up from her fake tears. Her eyes dry and vicious. I will post it. I will tell my followers. I will tell everyone that Savannah Wright is a cold-hearted snake who abandoned her family. You will be a pariah. I looked at them. I looked at the three of them, huddled together in their shared delusion, armed with nothing but emotional blackmail and entitlement. They truly believed they had leverage. They thought my reputation in this small, dying town mattered more to me than my dignity. They thought they could bully a woman who negotiated contracts with foreign governments for breakfast. I laughed. It was a short, dry sound. Go ahead, I said. They stopped. They hadn't expected that. Post it, I said, looking at Tiffany. Tell Aunt Linda. Tell the neighbors. Tell the entire internet. Do you really think I care? I took a step toward the door. My reputation is built on competence, I said. It is built on the fact that I deliver results. The opinions of people who have not seen me in 10 years are not a currency I trade in. Savannah, my mother, shrieked, her voice cracking. If you walk out that door, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? We will cut you off. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back one last time. Cut me off from what I asked quietly. From the judgment. From the manipulation. From the requests for money. I looked at my father, who was shaking with impotent rage. You are threatening me with a vacation. Dad? I opened the door. If this is the reason you called me back, I said, my voice ice cold. If this extortion was the important family matter you needed to discuss, then you called the wrong person. The daughter who sought your approval doesn't live here anymore, and the woman who replaced her doesn't negotiate with terrorists. I walked out into the hallway, the sound of their shouting fading behind me like static on a dying radio channel. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked with the steady, measured pace of someone who had just closed a bad deal and was walking away from the table without a backward glance. I stopped. My hand hovered over the cool metal of the front door handle. Behind me, my father's voice boomed, echoing off the narrow hallway walls. Fine, go. We do not need your charity. We will just take the full equity line out on the house tomorrow morning. We will mortgage this place to the studs if we have to. We don't need your permission to use our own property. That was the sentence. That was the trigger. I could have walked away. I could have let them walk into the bank and face the humiliation of rejection on their own. But I was not just a CEO. I was a woman who believed in closing loops. I turned around slowly. The hallway felt like a wind tunnel, the air charged with the static of their desperation. You cannot do that, Dad, I said. My father sneered, his face a mask of red-flushed arrogance. Watch me. It is my name on the deed. I walked back toward them. I didn't return to the den. I stood in the foyer, forcing them to crowd into the doorway like reprimanded schoolchildren. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope again. I had shown them the key to my future. Now, I was going to show them the chain to their past. I slid a thick, blue-bound document out of the folder. I held it up. The cover page was stamped with the seal of the county clerk. Actually, I said, your name is on the deed as a beneficiary. But the legal owner of this property is the Wright Family Preservation Trust, and you are not the trustee. My father blinked. He looked at the document, and a flicker of recognition sparked in his eyes. A memory from 5 years ago, buried under layers of denial, that he scoffed. That is just the paperwork we signed when that lawsuit hit. The one with the contractor. It was just to protect the assets. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything. I corrected him. Do you remember who you appointed as the trustee? You didn't pick Tiffany because she was 22 and had just overdrawn her checking account for the 3rd time. You didn't pick Mom because she refuses to read legal print. I took a step closer. You picked me. I said, you picked me because you said I was boring. You said I was the only one who liked paperwork. You thought I was a safe, silent vault where you could hide your house until the storm blew over. I flipped to page 14. Clause 7, Section B. I read aloud. The trustee shall have sole and absolute discretion regarding any encumbrance, mortgage, lien, or sale of the trust property. No beneficiary shall have the power to leverage the asset without express written consent of the trustee. I looked up. The silence in the hallway was heavier than the one in the dining room had been. This wasn't just awkwardness anymore. This was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. You signed this in 2019, I said. You never revoked it. You never asked to dissolve the trust because you liked the tax protection it gave you. Well, the protection comes with a lock, and I hold the key. My mother's hand flew to her throat. You mean we can't take out the loan? I mean you cannot borrow $5 against this house without my signature, I said, and I am telling you right now, as the fiduciary of this trust, I will not approve a high-risk loan to fund a drop-shipping scheme. The answer is no. Tiffany let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She stumbled back against the wall, her face draining of all color. No, she whispered. No, no, no. You can't do this. Why, I asked, looking at her. Why is the panic setting in now? Tiffany, it is just a delay, right? Unless I watch the gears turn in her head. I watch the realization hit her. Unless you already spent it, I guessed. Tiffany looked at the floor. She was shaking. I told Jason. She stammered. Jason, my father asked. Your fiancé. I told him the money was secured. She cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. I told him my family was backing me. He put the down payment on the warehouse this morning. He signed the lease. If we don't wire the funds by Tuesday, we lose the deposit. We lose everything. He will leave me. Daddy. He said he needed a partner who brought value to the table. The twist landed with the force of a physical blow. My father looked at Tiffany, horror dawning on his face. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. They hadn't just been asking for money. They were already in the hole. Tiffany had leveraged a promise she hadn't secured, banking on the fact that she could bully me into compliance. She had sold my compliance to her fiancé as a done deal. Savannah. My father's voice broke. He wasn't commanding anymore. He was begging. It was a pathetic, crumbling sound. You have to sign. Please. If she loses that deposit, it is $50,000. We don't have $50,000 liquid. They will sue her. They will sue the trust, my mother added, grasping at straws. They can't sue the trust, I said calmly. Tiffany signed the contract. Not the trust. Her liability is hers alone. My mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight. Desperate. You can't let this happen. She is your sister. You have millions. Savannah, millions. You just bought a house for cash. This is nothing to you. Just sign the paper. Just let us take the loan. We will pay it back. I swear. I looked at her hand on my arm. I remembered the sewing kit. I remembered the cold seat at the end of the table. I remembered the years of silence. I pulled my arm away. I protected myself. I said, my voice quiet and steady, I knew this day would come. I knew that eventually, your bad decisions would come looking for my resources. That is why I kept the trust active. That is why I kept the paperwork. Because I knew you would never read the fine print until it was too late. My father's face twisted. He abandoned the begging and went straight for the venom. You planned this, he spat. You came here to humiliate us. You vindictive little I didn't let him finish. I came here to see if you had changed. I said, you haven't? I put the document back in the envelope. I snapped the clasp shut. Now, here is the offer. I said, and this is the only offer you are going to get. They stared at me, trapped between their ruin and my mercy. I will not dissolve the trust. I said, the house stays protected. That means you have a roof over your heads that you cannot gamble away on crystals and lifestyle coaching. You will thank me for that when you are 80. But Tiffany, my mother started. Tiffany deals with her own mess. I said, if she lied to her business partner, she can explain it to him. If she loses the deposit, she learns a lesson about spending money she doesn't have. I looked at Tiffany. She was weeping silently now, the fight completely drained out of her. As for me, I continued, I am leaving. You will not contact me asking for money again. You will not use my name to secure credit. You will not tell your relatives or your investors that I am a silent partner. If I hear a whisper, one single whisper, that you are using my reputation to scam people, I will sell this house out from under you. The trust gives me the power to liquidate assets if the beneficiaries prove financially incompetent. Do not test me on the definition of incompetent. The threat hung in the air. Absolute and terrifying. They knew I wasn't bluffing. They had seen the closing statement. They knew I spoke the language of contracts better than they spoke the language of family. I turned back to the door. This time, no one tried to stop me. No one yelled. The silence was total. My father slumped against the wall, an old man defeated by his own fine print. My mother was holding Tiffany, both of them looking at me like I was a monster they had accidentally created in their basement. Maybe I was. I opened the door and let the cold winter air rush in, cleansing the stale atmosphere of the house. You thought I came back to show off my money, I said, pausing on the threshold. You were wrong. I looked back at them one last time. I don't just have money, I have leverage. And with that, I walked out into the night, leaving the door wide open behind me. The accusations hit my back like stones as I walked down the front steps. They did not chase me with apologies. They chased me with insults. It was the final explosion of a dynamic that had been pressurized for decades. And now that the seal was broken, the toxicity was spraying everywhere. You are ungrateful, my mother screamed from the doorway, clutching her cashmere shawl as if it could protect her from the cold truth I had just delivered. Money has changed you, Savannah. It has made you cruel. My father was right behind her, his face a mask of purple rage. You are selfish. You always were. We should have known you would turn your back on us. You think you are better than us now. You are nothing without this family. I reached the bottom of the steps and stopped. The gravel driveway was dark, illuminated only by the motion sensor floodlight that flickered above the garage. I turned around one last time. I did not shout. I did not cry. I simply looked at them, two people shrinking in the distance, framed by the peeling paint of the house they no longer really owned. I held up 3 fingers. 1, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the crisp winter air. You ignored me for 20 years unless you needed something fixed. You treated me like a ghost in my own home. I lowered 1 finger. 2, you invited me here today not to reconnect, but to liquidate me. You saw a daughter and thought you saw a bank account. You wanted my money, not my presence. I lowered the 2nd finger, leaving only 1 standing. And 3, I am not destroying you. I am simply refusing to save you from the consequences of your own greed. I dropped my hand. If you contact me again, I said, it will be through a lawyer. If you harass me, I will file a restraining order. If you slander me to the extended family, I will enforce the full terms of the trust and evict you for mismanagement of the asset. This is not a negotiation. This is the end. I turned my back on them. As I reached for the handle of my rental car, my phone began to buzz in my pocket. It vibrated once, twice, then a continuous stream of notifications. I pulled it out. It was the family group chat. Aunt Linda had been activated. How could you do this to your sister on Christmas? The text read. Family helps family. I am so disappointed in you. Then Uncle Jerry, your dad says you're cutting them off. That is cold. Savannah, even for you. Then a cousin I had not spoken to in 6 years. Wow, rich and heartless. Nice look. They were rallying the troops. They were trying to spin the narrative before I had even left the driveway. They wanted to drown me in shame. But they had forgotten that I was an engineer. I knew how to disconnect a faulty circuit. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I tapped the top of the screen. Select all. Block. I opened the group chat. Leave conversation. I opened my social media settings and toggled my profile to private, blocking every single person who shared my last name. It took 30 seconds. In half a minute, I had severed the digital tendrils they used to feed on my energy. The phone stopped buzzing. Silence returned. It was beautiful. I looked back at the house one last time. Tiffany was standing in the doorway now, sobbing loudly, draping herself over the doorframe like a tragic heroine in a bad soap opera. She was waiting for the neighbors to look. She was waiting for someone to come and comfort her, to tell her that she was the victim and I was the villain. But the street was empty. The neighbors were inside their own homes, living their own lives. No one was coming to save her. The audience she performed for did not exist. I got into the car and slammed the door. The sound was final, like the closing of a vault. I started the engine, turned up the heat, and backed out of the driveway. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, watching the headlights cut through the darkness. As I merged onto the highway, putting miles between me and the suffocating weight of my childhood, my phone buzzed again, a single, solitary vibration. My heart spiked for a second, thinking I had missed a number to block. But when I glanced at the screen, the name on the notification was not a Wright. It was Elena. Merry Christmas. Boss. The text read, "We are at the dive bar on 4th. Marcus is buying rounds and bragging about your Q4 projections. Come home. There is a seat saved for you. We miss you." I felt a lump form in my throat. But it wasn't painful. It was the sweet, sharp ache of gratitude. Come home. 2 words that my parents had used as a trap, but my friends used as a shelter. They didn't want my money. They wanted me. They wanted the Savannah who drank cheap beer and laughed at bad code jokes. They saw me. I am on my way. I typed back. I pressed the accelerator, and the rental car surged forward. I was not running away. I was driving toward something. 6 months later, Northlight Gridworks announced the acquisition of a smaller competitor. It was an aggressive move, one that solidified our dominance in the Pacific Northwest energy sector. I stood in my office, looking out at the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass. The rain was lashing against the window, but inside, it was quiet, warm, and controlled. My portfolio had grown. My real estate holdings had expanded. The house in Queen Anne was fully furnished now, a sanctuary of peace where no one yelled, and no one demanded anything I wasn't willing to give. I heard through the grapevine a distant cousin I hadn't blocked because she never talked to my parents, that the narrative back home had shifted. My parents were telling people that I was too busy with my little career to visit. They told the neighbors that Tiffany's business launch was delayed due to market conditions. They never mentioned the trust. They never mentioned the loan refusal. They spun a web of polite lies to cover the holes in their reality. It didn't bother me. I wasn't a character in their story anymore. I had written myself out of their script. My assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Wright, the board is ready for you." I turned away from the window. I smoothed down my blazer. I picked up my tablet. I felt light. I felt powerful. I felt whole. At Christmas dinner, my family gifted everyone except me. They thought they were punishing me. They thought they were putting me in my place. But they were wrong. By ignoring me, they gave me the clarity I needed to cut the last string. By trying to use me, they forced me to claim my power. They gave everyone else cheap perfumes and plastic gadgets. But that night, as I drove away from the house that never felt like home, I realized the truth. They gave me nothing, and in doing so, they allowed me to give myself the greatest gift of all. I walked away with my dignity, my sanity, and my empire absolutely intact. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a wild ride, and I hope you enjoyed seeing Savannah take back her power. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from work, from home, or maybe on your commute? Drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more satisfying revenge dramas, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support us, and smash the hype button so this story can be recommended to more people who need a little inspiration to set their own boundaries. See you in the next video.